prepping for them, not really when you're answering those questions. So just focus on answering the question, and that is fine, because it is the interviewer's job to extract data points from your answer, and it's their job to align it to the appropriate leadership principle or LP. So as a candidate, please do not spend time trying to understand which LP or leadership principle the interviewer is asking you a question on. And so for this, I would recommend that you use this particular PDF document. Let me drop it in the chat. Yeah. So this is a really good PDF document. I'll also share my screen so you know what I'm talking about. So what you're seeing here, is this PDF helps outline a lot of your past experience and accomplishments in the star format, and will really help formulate your answers better. And so as you can see in this document, there is space to add 15 professional moments or examples. But then again, like I said, it's always better to be prepared for more rather than less. So if you're able to come up with 10 to 12, solid examples, that should be fine. But yeah, if you definitely want to go above and beyond and do all of the 15, that's fantastic as well. So I'll also talk through what kind of projects you can talk about. And we'll also dive a little deeper into the level of detail that you will need to get to in a bit. But I do quickly want to go over the STAR format for those of you who are new to it. So what I mean by STAR format is when you're working on your example or when you're walking your interviewer through your example, you start your example by talking about the S, which is the situation. Then you move on to T, which is the task in hand. Post that will be A, the action that you took. And again, this is going to be a lengthy section. And so this is where you want to talk about, what you did to complete that task or that project. And not just that, it's also important to talk about how you did it. Because, sometimes when candidates, when they don't do so well, they mainly talk about what they did and they don't really talk about the how or the how aspect of it. So it's really important to touch upon both these aspects. And one other tip that I can give you, specifically for your LP examples, is focus on yourself, not so much on your team, because we want to know what you did, which is why it's really important to use a lot of I statements. So please make a mental note of that when you're working on your examples. And then last but not the least, the result, or rather the final quantifiable result. So why I say quantifiable is Amazon is extremely data heavy. So we rely on data for all our decisions, and that's obviously tied into our interview process as well. So when you're concluding your example or your answer in the results section, it's always great if you're able to bring in data, numbers and metrics, because see, that is where you're able to drive your point home in a way, and you're also able to convey the impact that you were able to make with the example that you're sharing. Like for example, if you worked on a project, talk about the revenue generation or the return of investment, or if you worked on an application, talking about the number of transactions or the number of users it impacted, right? So all of this goes a long way. Now, in addition to the STAR format, I also want to talk about an extra R, which stands for reflect. So the reason is, see, you will certainly get a lot of follow-up questions for the example that you share. And the reason is the example that you share is going to be short, crisp and concise. So I would say, don't extend it to beyond maybe 20 sentences, right? So once you share that example, you will get a lot of follow-up questions. And again, these follow-up questions, they do not mean that there's anything wrong with what you're sharing. It's just a way for the interviewers to dive a little deeper into your example and then be able to extract all the data points that is needed for them. It's as simple as that. Now, example of a follow-up question could be something like this. Hey, knowing what you know right now, would you have done anything differently? Or another sample follow-up question could be, what trade-offs did you have to make to achieve these results? So definitely expect follow-up questions. And again, as long as you know the details of your story or your example, right, you should be fine. So one other call out, please know that Amazon is extremely customer obsessed. So which is why if you are able to tie in your examples to customer impact, it goes a long way. And again, when I say customer, I don't mean a customer per se. Like, for example, there are teams here in Amazon where their customer is like another team, like a sister team, or their customers are other Amazon employees. So it really depends on your experience. So when I say customer, it can be another team, it can be a service, it can be internal or even external. And also, when you work on your examples, ensure they are your best solid examples, and it has the scale, it has the scope, it has the influence, and it has the impact, because that is what makes it a bar raising example for Amazon. Now, for scope and influence, you want to talk about examples that extend within at least your team or the product or service that you're supporting. Like, for example, you may be working on a merchandising system or a service that runs all the merchandising and inventory management for your company. And then if you have projects that maybe extend within that system, or if they extend to another team, or if they impact other engineers on that team, then I would say that's a bare minimal or a bar meeting example to share. Now, let's say that impact, if it extends to multiple teams across orgs even, right? So that's even better, because that is what we call as bar raising. But at a bare minimum, it should at least extend within your team, within your own team. So you definitely don't want to focus on small projects that could only impact you. You do want to focus on projects that could impact other engineers on your team, other teams, other orgs, your business, and other product team, and all of that. And also, when it comes to the type of work, you want to talk about working on large components of features. I'm sure some of you may have had the opportunity to work on multi-year projects where you're taking maybe a service or a system, and then maybe you're building out a wide variety of modern microservices, and then maybe embedding everything into like a cloud native environment. So here, if you're talking about something like this, I'm sure you'll have a ton of examples within that one project itself. So I would say, think of that one project like a book, and then let's say you build out 5 to 6 different microservices, then I would treat each microservice as a chapter or a separate example. So when it comes to your scope of work, this is how you want to separate it out. That way, you're not repeating the same example. And of course, for each of those microservices, you would go into the same level of detail in terms of how did that individual service impact the overall system, what was involved in building that service, and all of that. So once you're done working on your examples, so one thing I'll say, please feel free to use your recruiters as a resource or a sounding board to get feedback on really how to enhance your examples, right? To meet and raise Amazon's bar. So feel free to share or run your examples by them prior to your interview to be able to get that feedback. That is super helpful. And I know I see a few questions in the chat, but before I get to that, I want to go ahead and drop a few helpful links in the chat. I would recommend that you bookmark them. And so typically with candidates, that I have worked with personally and who have gotten an offer, they've used these links and they've hugely benefited from them. So just bear with me while I drop it in the chat. Okay, so here are the links. So please, bookmark them. And I would not be going through each of these links in the interest of time, but yeah, certainly feel free to use them for your prep. So let me get to the questions. So will all LPs be covered? No. So even though we have 16 LPs, Garcia, so every round you will only be asked 2 leadership principles. So that's across 4 rounds. So you'll only be asked 8 leadership principles across, and none of the leadership principles will repeat. So all of the leadership principles that are going to be assigned to the interviewers are going to be unique, which is why it is super important that you also share your answers that are unique and that you ensure that you don't repeat your examples across any of the rounds. Does that help answer your question, Garcia? Awesome. Of course. Another question from Ishan. Is it mandatory to use examples from our work, or can we use strong, relevant examples from our academic life? I would highly recommend to use that you use examples pertaining to your work, because that is what is super relevant. But if you want to use examples from your academic life, I would keep that as an additional sort of like a subset of what you're already sharing with your work example. But yeah, definitely would not recommend using that as your primary example. Yeah, of course. Any other questions?
So I have a quick question about, actually I see Gracia already has the same question. Can I reuse the example from phone screen round? And also, if really there is a story that's very, very good and it can actually address multiple leadership principles, can I reuse them even within the 4 rounds of the onsite to different interviewers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. Yes, you can certainly reuse the example from your phone screen round, because first of all, the interviewer who's going to be on your phone screen is not going to be on your final onsite. So that's one. So you can certainly reuse it. But as far as repeating examples across different rounds for your final onsite, I would honestly not recommend, because once you've shared that solid example with, let's say, one of the interviewers, they would make a note of what leadership principles your answer aligns to. So the data point is already there. So you don't necessarily have to share it out with another interviewer, because the data point has already been captured. So I would highly recommend that you bring in, unique examples across different rounds, because the interviewers are looking to get a diverse range of examples from you. So yeah, does that help answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Of course. Any other questions? All right. So moving on. So I'll now go over a live example of a leadership principle question. I'll also give you an example of a typical bar raising answer, right? And but before that, for those of you who joined late, please drop your name, your email address that you used to apply on amazon.jobs.com, along with your current location in the chat box, because we do use it to track attendance. All right. So like I mentioned, I will share a live example of an LP question, and I'll walk you through how a bar raising candidate would answer that in the STAR method. That way you get an idea on the level of detail into which you need to go to while answering such questions. And just for the purpose of this discussion, we will consider deliver results, which is one of our key leadership principles, and we will use a question from that leadership principle. And again, just to reiterate, the interviewer is just going to ask you a question. They'll likely not say that this is a deliver results question, and they'll simply ask it. So like I said, please focus on answering the question versus trying to determine which leadership principle it is, and and then understanding how to respond. Okay, so just drop the question in the chat. So tell me about a time when you had significant unanticipated obstacles to overcome in achieving a key goal. What was the obstacle? Were you eventually successful? Now, I'll go over the candidate's answer. And just for the purpose of this discussion, I'm going to break it down into situation, task, action, and result. Obviously, you don't have to do that. As long as your answer flows in the STAR format, you should be fine. All right. So this was a candidate's answer. So begin with a situation. My team had a goal to run a campaign in our mobile app that would reward customers with a cash reward if they performed a certain sequence of actions. This was our first globally scoped campaign. We had about 2 weeks for development, and the campaign itself would run in 4 weeks. So there you go. So that is the situation. So as part of the situation, I've given the context, I've given the background, I've also stated what the goal was. And moving on to the task. My team owned the mobile app components, and another team was responsible for issuing the reward. We did a soft launch and received a report from our sister team that we were subject to large amounts of fraud, which was greater than 50% of all the rewards issued. This was from customers who were creating fake accounts to just claim the reward. This was causing the company to lose money and reducing the effectiveness of the campaign. We stopped the soft launch, but when speaking with our stakeholders, we were only able to delay the launch over the weekend because word of the campaign was already spreading, and we wanted to avoid the reputational damage of stopping it early. So that was the task. Moving on to the action. When speaking with our sister team, I found that they did not have the resources to make any changes to their service in order to detect and block fraud. So in order to keep the campaign going, I decided to make some basic controls into our service so that we could at least block the biggest fraud sources and in that case, not call our sister team's service to issue the reward. This involved creating rules for account age and customer country. In order to keep stakeholders updated, I did 2 calls per day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, to give them confidence that we could put in this interim fix and not delay the campaign. The initial plan was to launch on Monday morning, but I pushed back on this and instead requested Monday afternoon so that we could do more testing. Our stakeholders agreed to this. Now, moving on to the last but one section of the result. We still experienced some fraud during the campaign, but this was less than 0.5% of all rewards issued and was a significant improvement over what we were initially seeing. As a follow-up, I also worked with the product owner on our sister team to define priorities, including more fraud protection in their service, so that the other teams would not have to keep doing workarounds like we had. I also did interim updates to their service documentation so that it was clear to their callers that they would have to be responsible for fraud detection and blocking in the short term. Now, I just detailed everything. So I talked through the project in the STAR method. At this point, a relevant follow-up question could be something like this. Wow, getting reward fraud down from more than 50% to less than 0.5% is not an easy task. Knowing what you know right now, is there anything you would have done differently? So now comes the extra hour or the reflect part. I think the main thing was that we did not prioritize fraud and security and make clear all expectations around what each service would be responsible for. We mainly focused on service contracts and what data would look like, but did not think about all the different customer scenarios and who would be responsible for negative cases. If this was clear when we started working on the campaign, we could have accounted for it as part of development. We should have asked more detailed questions around fraud. This is now part of our checklist when we start a project or a campaign so that we can make sure that everyone is thinking about these kind of scenarios. So that was the reflect part. Now, what makes this a solid deliver results example? So one thing that jumps out to you is the usage of data, right? So where the candidate is able to clearly convey impact. So from greater than 50% to less than 0.5% is where the impact is being conveyed. So that's fantastic. And then the candidate still tried to deliver to a deadline, but they were willing to push back to ensure appropriate quality. So here they're thinking about the customer. They're asking for more time to test to ensure that the product is of top quality. And then the candidate overcame an unexpected issue. And even though they could not find a perfect solution, they were still able to deliver something that worked. And then communication, and this is key. So the candidate communicated regularly with stakeholders. And again, this is something that happens often here at Amazon. There is going to be cross-team collaboration. There is going to be business interaction, and that's a key thing. So you definitely want to highlight that in your examples. And then the candidate was vocally self-critical, and this is also something that is highly encouraged at Amazon. It's highly encouraged to be vocally self-critical. So in this case, the candidate was able to reflect on what went well, what did not go well. And they were able to take lessons learned for improving other services and also on how they could improve delivering their own projects. So when we recap this and, try and put all this together, your priority as a candidate should be focused on, first of all, answering the interviewer's question. You don't want to try and squeeze in an example from your list if it doesn't really address what the interviewer is asking. And remain flexible. The interviewer will ask you follow-up questions based on what you're sharing with them. So please be flexible and please be prepared, to answer those follow-up questions. And again, to reiterate, please use a range of examples. So ensure you have different examples or different stories with different interviewers, and you're not repeating your examples across any of the rounds. Like I said, it's important for the interviewers to get a variety of examples and data points. So it is key that you not repeat your examples across any of the rounds. So let me pause here to see if we have any questions before I hop on to the technical section. I see we have a question in the chat. Just wondering, we only need to focus on... Hey, Garcia. No, not really. So the 12 LPs that I shared are definitely key LPs, but I would definitely not recommending just focusing on those. Like I was saying, none of us have visibility on to which leadership principles you'll be asked a question on. It's always better to go above and beyond. So we have 16 leadership principles. So always better to at least prep for the first 15. Does that help answer your question, Garcia? Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? All right. So moving on to technical prep. Now for technical, since there are 4 rounds of interviews, the tech is broken down into 4 sections or 4 competencies, if you will. Now, 3 of these are going to be coding and 1 is going to be system design. Now, each round will have focus on one particular competency and the interviewer will assess you on that particular competency. And much like what I told you in the LP or the leadership principles section, even here, the interviewer will not tell you that this is a competency that they're assessing you on. And as far as you're concerned, it's going to be a plain technical question. It could either be a lead code style question or it could either be like a real world problem solvable in lead code style. So I'll go ahead and drop the 4 competencies in the chat. So please make a note of that. And again, before I go into each of these competencies in detail, I do want to share like a common theme that you will find across all of these competencies. So specifically for coding, irrespective of which competency you're assessed on, the question that you're going to be asked is going to be ambiguous. It's going to be vague. It's going to be open-ended. So that's a given, because at Amazon, we deal with ambiguity every single day. And again, that is tied into our interview process. So the question is going to be ambiguous. So the first step at which you're going to be assessed is how are you dealing with that ambiguity? And again, this is across all 3 rounds of coding, right? So once you're given an ambiguous question, the interviewer is going to want to see if you're somebody who's willing to take a step back, ask all the right kind of clarifying questions, meaning conduct that detailed intake, and only when you're sure on what is being asked or how you approach the problem, it's only then that you will jump into solving the problem. So even if this is a problem that you've already solved on lead code, let's say you already know the answer to it, please still take the time to ask clarifying questions, because that is literally the first step at which you'll be assessed. So please do not skip this step. And the second thing is, for you to pass all the coding rounds, you will need to get to the most optimal solution. So that is key. So definitely ensure that you get to the most optimal solution. And the third thing is, as much as the result is important, it's also important for the interviewer to understand your thought process. So think out loud, give the interviewer an insight into your thought process. And simply put, the way that I would say is, treat it less like an interview and more like a brainstorming session that you would have with your manager or your peer or even your customer if they came to you with an ambiguous requirement. So how would you treat that conversation? So that is exactly how that I would recommend that you treat discussion. So please drive that conversation, own that conversation. Like I said, think out loud. For example, if there is a coding question, you have different approaches in mind to solve that problem. Talk through, walk the interviewer through those different approaches that you have in mind. Talk to them about why you think one approach is better than the other, right? And if you want to go with one particular approach, ensure you're able to justify as to why you think that is the best approach. So essentially keep that conversation going, ensure there is a very good collaboration, ensure it is interactive, don't assume anything. And even if you're assuming something, check in with the interviewer if they're aligned with those assumptions, right? So definitely own and drive that conversation. It is a huge value add. So please keep that in mind. And one last thing that I do want to call out for coding is picking up on hints and inputs. So if you're stuck at any point in your coding, your interviewer is going to give you hints and inputs to help you. Now, those hints are given for a reason. So that is where they would assess the coachability aspect of it. Meaning, if you're stuck at a point, if you're given a couple hints, are you able to pick up on those hints and get to the solution? So that will tell the interviewer that, hey, this candidate is a very good listener. They're able to take feedback on my work. They're very coachable. So all of this goes a long way in you getting close to your offer, right? So please keep these things in mind, irrespective of which competency you're assessed on. These are, common points that I would love for you to keep in mind. So I see we have a question. Would we know which round is which? No, you would not. That's exactly what I was saying, Garcia. So you would, much like leadership principles, even here, you would not know what you're being assessed on. So the question is going to be like a lead code style question, or it could be like a real world problem. All right. And I also want to share the live code link that you will be using for your coding as well. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. So this is what your live code, link or your tool is going to look like. I'll also share with you the link to this. That way you can also play around with it. Just give me one moment. Right. Here's the link to the live code session. So as you can see here, there's a drop-down menu option on the right-hand side with a bunch of object-oriented programming languages for you to pick from. So that will tell you that language agnostic. So please pick a language that you're most comfortable in, or rather your strongest language should be fine. And one other call out: if you happen to pick a certain language in your first round, ensure that you continue to gain consistency and stick to the same language through the rest of the rounds. That way, it's just easier. And one last call out, this tool is more like a code editor. You will not be able to run, compile, or test your code. None of that. So you will essentially be able to write your code in real time while your interviewer is also able to view your code, right? And while interacting with you. That's essentially how it's going to go. So, which is why having that conversation, driving that conversation, as you code, walking through your solution as you code is key, because that's when you're able to convey your thought process, to your interviewer. Does that make sense? Any questions so far? All right. So let's get into each of these competencies in detail. All right, so starting with data structures and algorithms. Just give me one moment. Yeah, here we are. Awesome. So again, like I said, you will be given a technical problem which is ambiguous, which is a given, and it is designed to see if you're able to apply various data structures and algorithms, if you're able to make good trade-offs, if you can combine data structures to solve complex use cases that scale with level. So some commonly asked data structures and algorithms, at least in the past, have been from graphs, balanced trees, stacks, linked lists, hash tables, depth first, breadth first search. So really understand data structures you encounter in core libraries, like I said, trees, hash maps, lists, arrays, queues, and then understand common algorithms like traversals, divide and conquer, sorting, linked lists, when to use BFS versus a DFS, and then consider different possible data structures you could use to solve this problem. Is one more optimal than the rest? So make sure you're able to justify your reasoning. So definitely provide runtime complexity and space complexity of your solution, because this competency is there to measure your ability to choose the most efficient runtime solutions. Like, for example, I'm sure we have different data structures that perform better for reading data, while there are others that perform better for writing data. Excuse me. So ensure you're able to pick the right kind of data structure for the given problem statement. And again, ensure you're able to justify as to why that is your best choice. And also for algorithms, they should be as fast as possible. And of course, they should be able to solve, the problem correctly. So when it comes to a sample data structure and algorithms question, like I said, you may get a lead code type question, or you could either get a real world problem. So I'll go ahead and share a sample of that in the chat, where this is an example of a real world problem. Yeah. So just drop the example in the chat. So please make a note of that. So yeah, that's it about data structures and algorithms. And we will now move on to problem solving, which is the next category in the technical section. But any questions so far? And again, I know I'm not going into each of this in too much detail. The only reason I'm navigating is just for you to know that everything that I'm sharing today is coming from this particular course. So definitely, review this after the session and it'll feel more like a refresher.
I have a question.
Sure.
So I'm just wondering, for the live code platform, will we be able to have like a separate digital whiteboard available for us to like sketch out ideas or flowchart?
So the whiteboard that you will use is only for your system design interview, but you can certainly have like a notepad or a sheet of paper with you that you can use to sketch it out, and feel free to hold it up so the interviewer is also able to see what you did.
Oh, I see. Got it. Thank you.
All right. So moving on to problem solving. So again, like I said, for problem solving, you will essentially be assessed on whether you're able to take this problem, which is going to be highly ambiguous for a reason. So you should be able to take this question, conduct a detailed intake, meaning ask all the right kind of clarifying questions, call out any assumptions you're making, check in with the interviewer if they agree with those assumptions, if they're on the same page. And then once you have clarity, then you will break it down, consider different approaches to solving that problem, talk through why you would like to pick one approach versus the other, which is where you're going to be talking about trade-offs. And like I said, when I was talking about the leadership principles, it's highly encouraged to be vocally self-critical, and that applies in your coding as well, and specifically in problem solving. And what I mean is, if you pick a certain approach, it's absolutely fine to be able to talk through what are the risks involved or even bottlenecks involved with that approach, that you chose, and also on ways to mitigate it. So once you're sure on how to solve or how to approach the problem, you will then obviously need to convert this into code, which needs to be an optimal solution, right? So like I said, getting to the optimal solution is extremely important for you to pass the coding round. But as much as that result is important, it's also important for the interviewer to understand your thought process. So definitely drive that conversation, talk through the different approaches, talk through the trade-offs, talk through the bottlenecks. So ensure you're driving and really owning that conversation. So there's a really very good audio script that I want to share with you. This is essentially like a live walkthrough between two engineers going through this particular competency. I would highly recommend listening to this because this is super helpful. So I just dropped the link in the chat, so please bookmark that as well. And a sample question for problem solving, I'll also drop that. All right, so this is a sample question for problem solving. So please make a note of that as well. So I'll move on to the next section, which is logical and maintainable. So any questions for problem solving? All right. So I'll take that as a no. So logical and maintainable. This is kind of a given. As an SDA at Amazon, any code you write has to be of top quality. It has to be logical and maintainable. So essentially, a clean code. Now, this competency measures your ability to write maintainable, readable, reusable, and then understandable code. So, simply put, like let's say there is a junior programmer, or a junior developer on your team. They have absolutely no previous knowledge of the code that you have written, and they take one look at your code and they should be able to understand how it works. They should be able to evolve the logic. They should be able to investigate it or even, debug it when needed. So specifically, like I said, it's about writing a clean code. And if anyone is not familiar with the clean code concept, I want to go ahead and share this link with you. This essentially, talks about what a clean code approach means. And if you're practicing this for logical and maintainable round, you'll certainly pass this round. So like I said, it is important that you write syntactically correct code and consider whether there's a simpler way to accomplish what you're trying to do. And like I said, if someone else came along and they looked at your code with minimal context into the problem, would they understand what your solution is doing? And also, when writing your solution, consider what would happen if new requirements or if maybe additional complexity was added. Would you be able to easily incorporate these new elements, or would you have to rewrite a significant portion of the solution, right? So keep all of these things in mind when you're approaching a problem. And I'll also share a sample question for logical and maintainable. Give me one moment. So here's a sample question for logical and maintainable. So please save this as well. So any questions so far before we move on to system design? I see we do have a question in the chat. Do the problems tend to be multi-part, or do we have the entire time for this question? It's a great question, David. So it really depends. So let's say you're given a question, and if the interviewer thinks you have enough time left, then they could add multiple layers of complexity as you go. So it really depends on the interviewer. Does it answer your question, David? Yeah, of course. Any other questions before we move on to system design? All right. So moving on to system design. So for system design, you will be using a whiteboarding tool, and it's called Bluescape. So unfortunately, I don't have the link on me right now. But as you get closer to your interview date, you will receive this link along with the other links such as Chime and your live code link as well. Excuse me, and you will receive all these links at least 72 hours prior to your interview. So you will have ample time to play around and get yourself familiarized with these links, which I highly recommend that you do. So back to your system design. This competency is designed to measure your ability to black box design a software system. Now, the goal is for you to have a design in production with considerations of deployment, scaling, failures, availability, and then performance. So please be prepared to discuss latency and concurrency, as well as how your design scales, and of course its fault tolerance. There is a 5-step methodology to solving system design problems, and I'm not going to go into it in too much detail in the interest of time, but I will drop the methodology in the chat, so please take time to see this. It is super helpful. So one thing to keep in mind during your system design interview is to consider your interviewer as your customer or your product owner. Again, like I said, they are giving you a problem, and by viewing them as your customer, you're able to drive that discussion, accordingly. Now, to give you an example of the kind of question in system design, it could be something as simple as, hey, design an inventory management system for a fulfillment center. So as you can see here, it is an open-ended question. It is ambiguous. It is vague. So the first thing that you would need to do is requirement analysis, right? So this includes gathering information about the problem space, performance requirements, scalability needs, security concerns. So understand first what problem your system is supposed to solve and what expectations do they have in terms of functionality. So please ask clarifying questions if that is not clear. And again, see your interviewer as your customer, because requirements are going to be intentionally vague and they're only there to give you those clarifications. Like, for example, for this inventory system, your clarifying question could be something like, hey, how many pieces of merchandise are we dealing with? What rate is the new inventory coming in at? What rate is it going out at? Who is interested in what inventories are available? When or how long would something be in inventory for? So these are some good kind of clarifying questions that you should be asking before jumping into solving the problem. And then the system interface. So defining the interface between different components of system, including APIs, the parameters it takes, the return values, and very importantly, estimating the scale of the system. Now, like I said, it's super important, so I do want to highlight this. Consider scalability and performance implications of the design, including factors such as load balancing, caching, database optimization. Like, for example, if you're designing this inventory for this particular fulfillment center, and then let's say you only have 5 fulfillment centers supporting you right now, and then maybe your company grows and maybe acquires another 100. Now that's a pretty massive increase in terms of scale. So you want to anticipate that. So, and also by seeing your interviewer as your customer, you're able to plan for the scale and think on those lines. And then defining or designing the data model for the system, including the schema for the database, the structure of the data files, the data flow between components. And this is also a question that I get asked a lot. So specifics like AWS technologies are not needed, since this is a high-level abstract design. So if you can say something like, hey, I want hash maps wrapped in a service. Now, that's a great substitute for something like a DynamoDB, which is basically the same thing. So the interviewers will not expect you to know a specific system or a technology, and it all stays very high level. And then storage based on the amount and type of data that the system needs to store. You should be able to identify databases, discuss trade-offs. You should be able to calculate storage required to handle the load for that given system. And then talking about your high-level architectural design itself. So this is where you will identify 5 to 6 components that is needed to solve this problem from end to end. So this is where you will draw a block diagram using the Bluescape tool, representing these core components of your system, and then you'll also depict how these components interact with each other. So there is no need to give in-depth explanation of each of these components unless you're asked by the interviewer, which they certainly will. And then designing the application service layer, which serves the request, and then listing down the different services required, designing the data storage layer, and then back to scalability. Usually a scalable system includes like a web server, like a load balancer, as a service partition, as a database, primary, secondary database clusters, caching systems. So once you have the high level design in place, the interviewer may then prompt you for a detailed design of select components. So this is where you will identify 2 to 3 components that are most critical, and then you will dive deeper. So one thing to remember here is, if you pick the wrong components, or if the interviewer wants you to discuss some other components, try to pick up on their hints and please dive deeper into those components. So hints are given for a reason, like I said. So definitely pick up on those hints and dive deeper into those components to which they're referring to. And much like what I told you for your coding, even here, keep that conversation going. You should be able to provide different approaches, their pros, their cons, and also talk about why you chose, this particular approach. And then last but not the least, performance monitoring. So at this stage, when you think you have a design that you think solves the customer's problem, ensure that it also incorporates operational performance and resilience in your design. And then you also plan for any failure, and then you also have measurable results in the form of metrics. So once you've done this, and if you have any time remaining at all, you want to take this time to discuss this with your interviewer as to, hey, what bottlenecks are there in this design? How do you plan to mitigate them? Is there any single point of failure in the system? How do you mitigate that? What do you do if you receive more traffic than expected? How do you handle that situation? How are you going to monitor performance of your services? Are you going to set up any alerts, right? And so on and so forth. So essentially what I'm trying to say is, keep that conversation going. I cannot stress this enough. Really drive that conversation, treat it like a brainstorming session, right? And ask clarifying questions and continue to walk them through your thought process. So yeah, I think if you keep all this in mind, you should certainly be fine. So yeah, that covers everything in system design. And I'll also go ahead and share a YouTube video that is a great resource for system design. And it honestly covers everything that I talked about, and in fact it goes into much more depth. So please go through this video, and if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach back out to your recruiters, or to me as well, and happy to help. So here is the link to the YouTube video. And I know I had a question in the chat. I'll get to it in a bit. Just bear with me. I also want to go ahead and share some additional links for system design, because system design is very important for SD2 interviews. Sometimes can be a make or a break. So I'll go ahead and share some additional links for system design in the chat for you to bookmark. All right, there you go. So please take time to bookmark these as well. And like I said, take time to absorb this information, and for any questions, always reach out. Okay, let me get back to the question. Okay, what exactly is the difference between problem solving and data structures? Does the problem solving round also have coding? Yes. So essentially all of these are coding rounds, right? Whether it is problem solving, whether it is logical and maintainable, whether it is data structures and algorithms, all these 3 are coding rounds. So you will not know what you're going to be assessed on. So when it comes to the difference, the problem solving round will have a little more ambiguity than the other rounds. That's honestly the main difference. But in terms of what you're going to be assessed on in problem solving is this, right? Whether you're taking a step back to ask clarifying questions, whether you're jumping right into solving the problem, are you picking up on hints and inputs? Are you considering different approaches? Everything that I just explained to you is what is going to be assessed in problem solving. And specifically, because you will not know which competency you're assessed on, it's better to keep all these things in mind across all of the rounds. And for instance, let's say you don't do well on the actual problem solving round, but if you do well on the other two coding rounds and you kept all these things in mind, right? In terms of asking questions, picking up on hints and all of that, then the data point they collect in those two rounds could potentially help mitigate the gap, or rather close the gap that I saw in one of the other rounds where you didn't do well, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's essentially the maintenance. Does that help, Isha? Awesome. All right, any other questions? All right, so if no other questions, so I'm going to be here for a while, at least for the next 5 or 10 minutes to see if we have any questions. But for those of you with no questions, you can feel free to drop. But thank you so much for joining. I know this is a ton of information. Please take time to absorb this. I'm hoping this was helpful. And yeah, for any questions or clarifications, please reach back out to us, and I'm happy to help.
Thanks so much, Aly.
Of course.